You take steroids, what happens?
The body stops producing.
Body stops producing it. But but there are ways that you can encourage testosterone production, right? And when you do that, it's more sustainable and it's typically stronger and thicker. So
Amazing.
Did not know that, but definitely gonna try that out because I'm looking for anything at this point. It's one of those things where I have fears that I'll get throat cancer.
Oh, because of the
From what now?
From the acidity.
acid reflux.
I just now caught up to the conversation. Acid reflux.
I have GERD, so
GERD.
was asking Dave his professional opinion on how to.
Was there a whole
mitigate it.
conversation I just missed?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
guys went through the whole
It started off with my lactose intolerance and how we probably have
Here we are.
I probably have dysbiosis instead of lactose intolerance. So.
Welcome. The key is in the contract.
Yeah.
And now we know why Dave actually is a doctor, among other reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we live actually?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep,
cool.
we're live.
Hey guys.
well, what's up?
Hi.
Hello.
Ran a little behind today, but we're caught up and we're getting ready to roll here.
Was the crisis averted at the
that's
locked out of the house?
Ironic, isn't it, that we're going to have a conversation about doing what you got to do for your kids, and that's exactly what
You
the
lived it
latest.
today.
Yeah, we're late today because we had somebody locked out of the house, and Dave had to go save the day.
Boom,
So
solving
I had
problems.
to go be Superman.
yeah, that's great to be a dad. You know,
Oh, absolutely. No, I think we've all seen this movie, right? Except maybe
many-
Aaron.
except
I'm
for
not.
Aaron.
That question's not for Aaron. I'm just assuming that he has not.
What's funny is, no, I haven't, but I have seen. Gosh, I don't even know how many scenes I've seen.
You've probably seen clips of it, like enough to know what the.
Yeah, maybe that.
That's the one
maybe
everybody
clip.
knows.
Yeah. Other than that, and I was pretty surprised when I saw it because this is not how I thought the movie was.
I had forgotten
Oh,
about
the
the
scene?
gravity of
Yeah.
that scene.
Yeah, because
Oh.
I've seen the scene. We go through it, and that's not what I thought the movie was.
Yeah.
Should we run the scene now?
We're gonna talk a little bit about it.
Okay.
Just we got some time here. I want to make sure that we do get through today quick enough so that Aaron can get out of here to go. Speaking of dads, go be at his kid's baseball game, softball. Sorry.
Yep.
Don't want a hook scene happening here
Yeah. I get
where the dad shows up and everybody's gone
liar,
from the game.
liar.
Or liar. Yeah.
Yeah, I have seen that because that one I've seen a lot of Jim Carrey stuff.
He's a liar.
liar, liar.
Oh, you
What do you mean a lawyer?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. When was the last time you guys seen this movie?
Shoot, as long.
Or I saw. Let me rephrase that. What was the first time that you saw it? Was it like in movie theaters when it first came out, or did you see it at home? Because it was still back in the VHS days.
I saw it I did not see it in the theaters, but we watched it soon after it hit the video stores. I think my daughters were little, probably. This was in the mid '90s when we saw it. Yeah. What year did it come out?
Like 94, 3.
94, yeah.
Something
That'd have
like
been about
that.
right, yeah. So I was living in Jacksonville, North Carolina.
Hey.
Yep. In the Marine Corps. Yeah.
Dave, what about you?
No idea. Couldn't tell you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not. To me, it's one of those movies that's not like, where were you at this time?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I have no idea. I could tell you where I was on Independence Day,
Oh,
that movie.
This.
but I couldn't tell you where. I've seen it a few times. I mean, maybe, the Sunday Fox Sunday movie or
Yeah.
Oh,
something
they
like
used to do
that,
that,
or
I bet.
something like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
TBS.
Something like that. Yeah.
I was in second grade when Independence Day came out, and watched it. And I remember running out of the room when the teenager got sick. I don't know if you remember specifically that scene for whatever reason. Like my brain was just telling me that he was turning into an alien, so I just ran out of the room. Like, "Ah!" And it went to my mom, and she's like, "What are you watching?" Like, oh, and she was like, "Oh, you probably shouldn't be watching this," but oh well. I saw it probably the same time frame, about third grade, fourth grade or so, and if I don't know how you guys are, but I was hooked just because of Robin Williams' character. I grew up on Robin Williams. I think I'm like that generation where we came,
He
to
was
age
yeah,
when he was at his peak.
He was the genie.
Right, the genie,
in Atlanta.
Hook, Peter Pan.
Yeah.
He was one of my favorite movies. What Dreams May Come.
Oh, yeah.
Several great movies, fantastic movies that all revolve around him, and he had such a range too. Don't know that one?
No, I didn't. Sorry. I was like, why was there?
What Dreams May Come?
Animated, or was there?
No,
No.
What Dreams May Come was kind of a playoff of Milton's Paradise Lost. The idea that
Oh.
yeah, this is a literary reference here, is that, you know, in Paradise Lost, Milton wrote, Virgil takes the author through the circles of hell.
Mhm.
When What Dreams May Come, he goes through purgatory to try to reunite with his
Mhm.
lost love.
Yep.
Yeah.
You have seen that?
I have seen it, and it's like this weird sort of hell thing, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's gray and
It's-
I
Yeah.
have seen that,
It's-
and he
yeah.
goes on the river Styx. Is that
Yep,
the deal?
yep.
I have seen
Yep.
it.
Yep.
There we go.
They,
See, when I
One
think
out
of
of
Robin
10.
Got
Williams,
there.
I think of Mork and Mindy.
Oh yeah.
yeah, there's the age gap.
Yeah. Nanu.
Yeah, if you have never watched Robin Williams stand up on golf, on his explanation
Oh,
of golf, you need to do
This
that.
with the Scottish.
Yeah, his
He
Scottish
makes-
accent
makes
and
fun
the
of
golf.
Scott's pretty good, but I'll give him that. It was a pretty decent
He did.
accent.
He did one of his stand up was where he was like, "Whoa, come inside my mind."
Uh-huh.
You know that part where he's like, "Come in my mind and see what it's like when a comedian bites the big one."
Yeah,
That whole skit, like I relate to that skit for whatever reason, very much so. It's just because that's how my brain works at times, or at least I feel like it, like how he goes through all of the emotions and psychology, and you know, and he does it like such a funny way that's like, oh God, like, yeah, he's doing it to be funny, but that perfectly explains how my brain works.
that's when we think about what known as and Dave, please chime in on this. The default mode network is like there's a part of our brain that just that's the monologue that's constantly going, and we're cycling through these different thoughts, feelings, emotions, you know, and it's rumination.
Mhm.
But that's how we all most of the time we function that way, and if we're not aware of it, we can't pinpoint it and say, wait a minute, that's not productive, you know. But also it's part of who we are, and it's really funny when you think about kind of the crazy stuff that we we do tackle.
Yeah. Have you guys seen Mrs. Doubtfire recently?
I have not. In fact, I forgot the weight, the heaviness of this scene. I'm kind of with Chili in the sense that I forgot how kind of somber and sad it got at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, and it gave me a totally different perspective to go from watching it as a kid, and I just remember this movie being like a funny movie, to now being an adult that has gone through a divorce and a custody, you know, hearing to seeing that now that it's like, oh, this movie stopped being funny quick.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just curious
The
if you guys.
threat is real.
Yeah, I was just curious if you guys had seen it recently and what it was like from when you first saw it to what your thoughts on it, on the movie as a whole, are now.
Well, I wouldn't say that I've seen it recently, but I have seen it within, we'll say, post-divorce. So you're right in the idea that it definitely changes what it is,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. You know, where prior to it's like, oh yeah, that's weird, that's funny, that's, you know, but the threat isn't real. And, you know, of course, post-divorce, you're like, oh yeah, I know what that's about. I know what's
Mhm.
up, you know, so you relate differently.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. You saw it as a child, so it makes sense that when you observed it, or the first time you watched it, your perspective was very.
I didn't understand it.
Yeah,
I don't know what
the gravity.
I don't know the gravity. Yes, good, great word there. I didn't understand what I was watching. Specifically the court scenes. I just was like, okay, adult words, you know, tune it out, blah blah blah. Wait for the funny parts where he's back in, you know, costume and running around, you know. But now as an adult, it's like, you know, I chuckle at the funny parts, but then the courtroom scene happens, and then it's just like gut punch, teary eyed. I am.
Think about how many families stay together. Well, I mean, he came up with a very creative way to get back with his kids, right?
Mhm.
And so many people they'll stay in a unhealthy relationship just because they don't want to deal with the fact that, oh, I might lose my kids, right? I might have to only see my kids half the time, right? How creative would we get to go do that?
Oh,
Yeah. But I remember during that time, around 94, 95, you know, I had kids pretty early in life, but things weren't weren't perfect, you know. And so when I saw that movie, I thought, wow, would I do that? Like, how far would I go to stay?
So you were already a dad at that
Yeah,
point.
I was a dad
So
at that point. Yeah,
That was real for you then.
absolutely. Yeah. And funny thing about it is, fast forward in 1999, so this movie was still in the popular, in kind of in the mainstream discussions of things. I was on the border, almost got divorced. We paid divorce lawyers, but didn't go through with it. But one of the things that kind of it was a tipping point or a decision point in our relationship, and as well as my career, is like we almost got divorced, and I had the opportunity to go to Japan 2 years by myself, unaccompanied, or 3 years with the family. And I was like, wow, I'm either going to be away from my kids for 2 years, or, hey, honey, you want to reconcile?
Uproot them.
Let's figure out how to make this work and go to Japan together. And so we did that. We went to Japan. Our marriage was kind of on the rocks, and we looked at each other and said, you know what? Things aren't so bad we can't repair it. Let's go try. And part of getting away from our families, the influence from mother-in-laws and my mother-in-laws, things like that, going away helped repair my marriage. But it was one of those points, a fork in the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about Robin Williams' character, and you're like, what would he do? You know, he's going to take on an entire persona to go be close to his kids. What would I do?
The ultimate acting job.
Yeah.
He was a dude playing a
Dude playing another
playing
dude.
a woman.
So, but I mean, that hitting that fork in the road and being forced to make that kind of major decision about what would you do to be with your kids.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have the clip ready to go. Let's watch.
Ms. Robeson, do you have any closing remarks?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Well, Mr. Hillard, since you've determined to act as your own attorney, you are entitled to make a closing statement at this time.
Your Honor, in the past 2 months, I've secured a residence. I've refurbished that residence and made it an environment fit for children. Those are your words. I'm also holding down a job as a shipping clerk. So I believe I met your requirements. Ahead of schedule. In regards to my behavior, I can only plead insanity. Because ever since my children were born, the moment I looked at them, I was crazy about them. Once I held them, I was hooked. I'm addicted to my children, sir. I love them with all my heart. And the idea of someone telling me I can't be with them, I can't see them every day, it's like someone saying I can't have air. I can't live without air, and I can't live without them. Listen, I would do anything. I just want to be with them. You know, I need that, sir. We have a history. And they mean everything to me, and they need me as much as I need them. So please, don't take my kids away from me. Thank you.
Mr. Hillard, you've been able to fool a lot of people into believing that you're a 60-year-old woman. No easy task. And your little speech seemed to be very heartfelt and genuine. But I believe it to be a terrific performance by a very gifted actor, nothing more.
No, it's not that.
The reality, Mr. Hillard, is that your lifestyle over the past months has been very unorthodox. And I refuse to further subject 3 innocent children to your peculiar and potentially harmful behavior. It is this court's decision to award full custody to Mrs. Hillard.
Oh, God, no, sir, please.
You will have supervised visitation rights every Saturday.
Supervised, sir?
Yes. A court liaison will accompany you when you spend time with the children. I am suggesting a period of psychological testing and perhaps treatment for you, Mr. Hillard. We will re-examine this case 1 year from now. Thank you. Court is adjourned.
So first impression for me is that terrifies me still to this day. That's a life, a cloud over my head every day. That fear of sitting there in a courtroom and judge says, well, we're taking your kids away. By the good graces, the kindness of my daughter's mother, she did not take my kids away. And I remember after we had to split and we were going through the divorce and having to sit there. When you go through a divorce with kids, you have to go through a divorce with minors, I think children proceeding, and you have to fill out the paperwork, and you have to sit there and you'd say, this is what the schedule's going to be. And I remember getting those papers and just like, I didn't want to open it. I was just, I'm not going to see my kids. I'm going to open up that paperwork and all my worst nightmares going to come through. So I didn't even open it. I actually went to my ex's house and we sat at her table, and through it all, we still have, an amicable adult conversations, and so we, hey, how's it going? What's new in your life? What's new in yours? Blah, blah, blah. And she's like, what's going on? Why are we here? And I was like, I put the paperwork down and I said, and I couldn't even form words. I started tearing up, and that gut punch feeling came in, and I remember just the only words that I could come up with was, don't take my girls. Take whatever you want. Take the house, take my money, take everything. Just don't take my kids. And she said, we're not. In fact, on paper, it's going to say that you have the kids every other weekend, and Wednesdays, every other Wednesdays, Thursdays, but you will be able to see your kids whenever you want. I'm not keeping your kids away from you. And that's still what the court order technically, legally says now on paper anyways. It's that schedule, but she allows me, don't get it twisted, she allows me to see my kids 50-50 right now. So it's a hard feeling, and it's Aaron, you and I have had this discussion, there's that threat that's always in the back of our mind when it comes to that.
Yeah, that you and I had a pretty good meeting. What was it? Maybe a month ago. 'Cause you and I are, there's still some fresh stuff in there. There's still some paperwork going on.
Yep.
And most of the last year, I've been dealing with a little bit of my paperwork involving that. And this scene is it's real, because that's what happened to me, when and I made a deal with my ex-wife and I. We get along great now, and she gets along great with my current wife, and I made a promise with her that I wasn't going to speak too much on, because she wanted me not to speak too much on our business, so I'm going to do it as carefully as I can and respect her, because she is the mother of my children. I respect the crap out of her. She's a great woman. So I will respect her, and I won't go too far down into details as to violate what she's asked me to do. But in the initial phases of the divorce, this scene, that was it. Except I didn't get supervised for months. I didn't see my kids for months. And there was actually a period where my mom saw my kids and took a picture of them to bring it to me. And she said, hey, I got to see your kids. She showed me the picture, and I didn't recognize their faces.
Wow.
She didn't tell me it was my kids at first. She said, hey, I got this for you. And I was like,
who were Who are they?
Yeah, what for what? What is it? Who are these kids? She's like, those are your kids. And I was like, I stared at it, could not recognize their faces, and for a while.
I mean, you, I mean, there was a very unique, leading up to that was very unique circumstances. I mean, your story about, you'd been through a lot, not only from just a physical dynamics, but also psychological. And so it makes sense that kind of disassociation was there. And, yeah, commend, big props to you for evolving beyond that.
Yeah, it's and Cam is right. I appreciate that, by the way, Lance. I appreciate that. And Cam, you're correct. It's a tough thing, and when we talked about it and talked about our situations with custody, dads, and it is changing. It is changing. It was a lot worse 10, 15 years ago. Dads don't have a lot of ground.
I got some.
I
I have
got-
some stats. You got stats?
You got stats?
I get actually on the outline that you have in front of you, Aaron. I put stats with cited sources
Okay.
on there.
You said you had some.
Yeah, you guys, this court scene. The research I did found that that only like 90% of those cases are settled outside of the court. You don't necessarily go into the courtroom and see a judge. Most 90% are settled outside. And 51% of the cases, most parents agree that the child goes with the mother. What I thought was very interesting is that
51?
51% of cases, both parents agree that the mom should have primary custody.
Okay.
What I found was interesting when it comes to child support, though, is this concept of the deadbeat dad. 46% of parents owe child support; they get it in full. 38% of custodial fathers get nothing. The woman does not pay child support 38% of the time, and that really does fly in the face of this idea of that there is this deadbeat dad concept, which I thought was very interesting. Yeah, what kind of stats you got there?
No, I have the one that, and I'll let Cam speak on the stats because you would know. You put these stats on here.
Yeah, I don't have the copy in front of me.
You want
but
this right here?
Sure.
Here.
We're about to break the fourth wall. He's in the room.
I am.
All right. Okay, so Lance, you already hit number one there. Half of all divorces involve children under 18. 4 out of 5 times the mom gets full or main custody. Only about 1 out of 5 times the dad gets full custody. Shared custody, about 1 in 4 families. Only about 1 in 10 have a true 50-50 split. So
Yeah.
I fall outside of that example because it's not a true 50-50. 90% of parents work custody outside of court. When the parents do agree, breakdown shows 51% for mom, 18% for dad, 11% is shared, 20% no agreement goes to court. Multiple reports note that 90% of child custody disputes are settled without judge rulings.
Yep.
The courts look at who did more daily caregiving, often moms, especially with young kids. I think that especially that last one is skewed slightly.
It's changing.
Well, it's changing, but definitely at the time, and even now, most men, I would say, have those jobs that require them to be gone, and for whatever reason, whether it be conditioning, whether it be guilt, self-guilt, whatever you want to call it, that we have to be the caregivers, that we have to provide, that we work, long hours and think we're sacrificing for the good of the family. Then it gets slapped in our faces when it comes time for court. So I don't know, Dave. What are your thoughts? We want to hear what you have to say.
Reward punishment.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Your face turned on that.
Oh my gosh, this topic just pisses me off to no end.
We don't want to ruin your day, though.
Are you gonna ruin the movie though?
I have bets with people that Dave's gonna ruin the movie.
We're going to change the name of the podcast to Dave Ruins Another Movie.
David ruins a movie. Well, to me, it's one of those things where it's, a lot of its power is perception, right? And, like it was hurting me to listen to you. Well, she let me have the kids. She allowed this to occur. And you hear this type of language from a lot of men in those situations, and the statistics seem to support it. But that's correlation isn't causation. The correlation exists because that's allowed. The one doesn't allow the other. The first doesn't dictate the second, and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, and I apologize. I got a whole bunch of different ideas running through my head, but here's the brass tacks. Kids need their mom initially, right? Kids need their dad eventually, right? And it's this idea that I'm going to be allowed to see my kids is insane. Like it's but here's the other thing too that we got to think about. At some point, kids get to make a decision, right? So there's another factor where, like some of this situation in the movie, just to kind of ruin the movie, a lot of it is situational nonsense, happenstance because of anger and so on and so forth, and eventually, like the movie shows, eventually she comes around, right? But it's also kind of, maybe we should be talking about the vindictiveness of the wife. Why does he choose to be the victim, and why are we not having probably more of a conversation of of the vindictiveness of what she was willing to do to her children just to attack her ex?
And that I think that's a huge that's the crux of, I think, most of this topic here, is that two adults are making decisions, and they're making decisions based on emotion. Emotion drives bias, bias drives belief, belief drives behavior, right? And so when we have those, when two adults are letting their emotions get in the way of good choices, the best choice for the best, greatest amount of good without infringing on the freedom of others, right? That's what we're talking about here. We want these two people to weigh the options and make the best choice for all people involved, not just my side. And that's the challenge here. And so I have a successfully blended family. I think I've said this before. During Thanksgiving, my former wife sat here and my new wife sat here. And I mean, we took family pictures together. And so that's unorthodox, but it doesn't have to be. But because of ego and, don't get me wrong. I mean, if one spouse is cheating on the other, there's a lot of pain involved there. And I understand why people have trouble managing that pain, but that pain is going to pass, and you're going to be left with the repercussions of your choices. I used to tell my young Marines when they were going through divorces and their exes or their spouses were, whether it's male or female, were acting a fool. I was like, remember this, your kids are young now, but when they turn 11 and 12, they're going to be able to look back on this and judge your choices that you made. And I want you to be able to stand by your choices with pride and conviction. So don't get angry, be steady, and remember that you always should keep the best interest of your children at the forefront of your mind, but that's too often emotions get in the way of things. And also,
Yeah, I would definitely say pain, guilt, fear, defeat comes into play.
Uncertainty.
Yeah, I guess uncertainty would be a good one. It's just to highlight what I was feeling at that moment, because you're right. We as men allow ourselves to feel a type of way, especially when it comes to custody. But in that moment, I was waving the white flag. I was in the wrong. In every facet of the word.
Yes, perhaps, but are you a good father?
I'm a great father.
Okay, so just because you're not a good partner at the time, I'm sure you are now. I'm not saying that you're not. You've been really good to me, and I appreciate that. Just because you weren't a good partner doesn't mean you're not a great father. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that, men can be great dads. We may not always be the best partners, but we can be phenomenal dads. And is there value in fatherhood. There should be. I mean, think about this, right? The more problem, we will always measure success in relation to the problems that we solve, right? Well, what problems do fathers solve? A lot, right? And so, I mean, it's almost like a moot point, right? At some point, we have to appreciate that, you know, there is a tremendous amount of value that a father brings to a child's life, right? And if you really wanted to dig into the statistics about that, we could. And to me, they far outweigh or I should say outshine some of the statistics that we're discussing here, right?
But
or more importantly, the absence of fatherhood.
Statistics say, and to Lance's point, what he said earlier, what 90% of child custody disputes are settled without the judge ruling. So the adults decide outside of court what the custody is going to be. And
But that's misleading. That's misleading.
Why?
Well, think about this. If all the men are like, I just don't want to any trouble, and I'm going to give concessions to just make sure that I have some sort of contact with my kids.
statistics back it though.
Statistics do back it, right?
So we make decisions because we are told as men, all of us, from the get-go, when you go to court, if you go to court, it's going to rule in the mother's favor.
So let's back this up a second here, and let's look at we as men are just as subject to social conditioning as in this dynamic as anyone else. All right. So, and I'm seeing this at play, right? We can call this out right here. You pointed out men go to work. The gender roles that our society has perpetuated for hundreds of years is that men go away to be providers and women are caretakers. And so therefore, when we're sitting down in that 90% of the time to negotiate this, we're either consciously or unconsciously conditioned to allow the mom to continue to do what our society expects of her. And we as men, it is for us to continue to go away and be providers, but then also have to figure out how to provide childcare by ourselves. The path of least resistance is to let mom continue to do what she's already been trained and conditioned to do, right? So it isn't necessarily like there is some higher social power that's mandating this. It's more along the lines like we as people, through our social conditioning, have come to expect this. And so the statistics the statistics bear out the expectations that we've been put on ourselves. Dave, what you're pointing out here is like, that doesn't have to be. There's no reason that has to be enforced. In fact, society's changing a lot. Some of the stats I pulled up, this concept, there used to be this notion of the tender years when, like you said, kids will need their mom, what'd you say, always, but dads will need eventually. Initially and eventually. Okay, well, that plays that out. The tender years, mom needs them, but then later on, dads need to come in to provide this dynamic. That played out in my life. I mean, my former wife would tell you that she was great raising them babies from newborn to about 4 or 5 years old. Once 4 or 5 years old came around and kids started asking them hard questions, she was like, you got it, right?
Go ask your father.
I have two daughters, and I'm the one who had the conversation about what a period was, because, and how to make babies. She looked at me and said, go talk to your dad, It wasn't like she couldn't have that conversation. She just knew that I was probably more suited to having that conversation. But it goes back, what's the best interest of the child, right? And this is if we're really taking an objective look with every case and ask that question, whether the best instance for that child? Do we want to be right or do you want to be accurate? I want to be right. Kids should be with the mom. Well, might not be the accurate thing for that family.
Definitely not accurate.
Yeah, it might not be the accurate thing for that family, right? So
Kid needs to be with the best parent for the best outcome.
And
but there you go. Right before Evie, and this is probably a relationship issue, but there's never, or I should say never, there's rarely in modern relationships a discussion about where we're going, about vision of the relationship and expectations and stuff like that. My ex-wife and I, we had a discussion before we ever got serious. Like here are my priorities, here are my values, are we compatible there? What about kids? What are we talking about? So there was some semblance of teamwork going into that, even though there was, because you got to think, right? There's a thin line between love and hate,
Oh yeah.
right? So and that's why, really passionate relationships can be really fiery, divorces and breakups. But it's fascinating to me because, if those conversations are had on the front side, even if you do break up and split, at least there's some integrity, because at the very least, if we establish that integrity was important between us, and then all of a sudden you're backing out, well, all right, that's between you and God, that you're just not a person of integrity, right? And so, there's ways around that. But I think having the conversation before everything, I think probably, but that goes back to being adults, right?
My former wife and I had that conversation too. We were like, hey, if this ever goes south, I commit to you that I will co-parent with you with respect,
There you go.
because the kids come before our
But how old
egos.
were you when you and her got together?
I was 17 when I was 18 when we had the baby, and she was 19.
So but how old were you when you had that conversation?
Probably, when we decided to get married, which was 2 years later.
So you
So
were
I
in your
was 20.
20s.
I was 20.
Okay. So, but there you go, right? So a lot of what happens in these young relationships, they're not mature enough to have those conversations. And so then it all goes sideways and stupid, and,
That's what I was going to ask earlier, is if we are as adults at getting married, I'd say, what would you say, like, the average marriage age is? Like 22, 21?
I think it's
Like-
getting a little older these days. I don't know.
yeah, I was going to say that's shifting
Let's go to the
dramatically.
interwebs.
Is it? So
Yeah.
I don't. So me, at least my generation, I remember seeing just a lot of people that I grew up with that were all getting married around anywhere from 19 to 22, somewhere in that range. How are we expected to have adult conversations when we don't even know who we are at that age?
Based on the usafacts.org, the average age as of 2023, 30.2 years for men and 28.4 years for women to
Wow,
get married.
dramatic shift.
Yeah. And that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah. So that's my question for you, though,
but
Dave.
Sort of, because here's the thing: why are more men holding off getting married? To avoid that kind of nonsense, right? They don't want the pain, they don't want the frustration, they don't want all this other stuff. And so, I'm not going to get married. I'm not going to get married. I don't want any of that. That's what's happening. We're seeing, and the funny thing is, you can find thousands of videos on, let's say, YouTube of different commentators, different, whatever groups, podcasts or whatever, people talking about the same thing. Like, don't do it. Don't get married. And so now you got a culture within the male sphere of, instead of encouraging, healthy relationships, don't do it, man. Like, because it is
She'll take
stacked
everything.
against you, and so, okay, I don't want that, know?
And that's interesting, because it's when we think about the, let's take it back. Men used to always get 100% custody because there was a sense of ownership over the family. Those children are mine due to patrilineal traditions. Those are my offspring. They're mine. You just happen to be the woman who birthed them to me. And then things shifted. And of course, feminism, it rises up. There's there's a shift in perspective on that. I think the legal system is probably ahead of the curve on balancing things. I know that sounds contradictory, but there was a point here. I had a stat here that kind of supports my talk amongst yourself.
Yeah, while you're looking for that, because here's something else to consider too. You figure that the and you kind of hit the nail on the head. Since about the 50s or 60s, there's been a growing trend that has formed a wedge between men and women. Now in 2025, and we've seen it. We can talk about it in a variety of ways, but this has been going on for a while, even back in Miss Doubtfire. But what is it, 90s and 80s, and like I said, starting in about the 50s. And we've had plenty of people try to warn us about it, but we don't maybe connect the dots or whatever. But this ideological subversion to the idea that men and women are enemies.
Yeah, and we're
right?
not.
And so now you end up where you've got people who are absolutely clear on divorce. They're going to, or don't get married at all. And so what happens there? What happens when we have an entire society that sees their natural counterpart as an enemy? What's that going to do for the long-term viability of the nation, let alone the societal elements that require that? And then, of course, you could look at the criminal statistics related to fatherless homes and the trajectory of a child without a father and so on. I mean, this is a self-inflicted wound. If you look at our society and you look at its breakdown, you're seeing a lot of elements that are absolutely self-inflicted, but it's through ideological subversion. Like, we're seeing each other as enemies, and if we're seeing that going into a relationship, like, ooh, this person could absolutely destroy me. I mean, that's not going to end well anyway, because now that thought is there. Like, well, if I screw up just a little bit anyway, there goes my kids, there goes my house, there goes all this other stuff. So you're going to play it loose anyway, because even if you do screw, I mean, the odds of you screwing up are pretty good.
Like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sort of, yeah, Pygmalion effect in a lot of ways. Where and so here's what's interesting: you factor in social media, things like TikTok, which of course, statistically speaking, is going to be a lot more female leaning and absolutely anti-male when you look at some of the trends and stuff. I mean, the influence, everything else, it's way too much. It's way too much. And it is a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways. And so it's only when, this is just a theory, but I think that, as we get older and more mature and start to realize that, well, wait a second, like, all the things that I was told and encouraged and believed and taught, maybe in some cases, about all of this stuff might be wrong. This person's not so bad.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this before. Is like the counter to misogyny is not misandry. The counter to oppressing women is not to oppress men. That's what we're talking. So when we think about the relationship dynamics, is like, guys aren't always the bad ones. Women are just as capable of infidelity and abuse,
Rape
and
everything.
yeah. So that now, do statistics suggest that men are more aggressive? There's more testosterone, and yes, domestic violence cases are most likely perpetuated by men. That doesn't mean it's always. And
I was going to say, and if you dig into that, it's only barely.
And how
well,
many,
and that goes back to the case of which is reported.
exactly.
Yeah,
That's
and
the,
there's
that's
how many of them are
the
reported?
subtlety that we have to
Exactly right.
identify here. Is like, domestic violence is capable, is prevalent on both sides, and men are, yes, higher prevalent, but that's a lot of times, like, how many guys are going to go report domestic violence incidents against
Well,
themselves?
they get laughed out.
Yeah, well, and that goes back to that alone.
Or not believed, right? I mean, I can tell you in one situation in my life, I can remember it as though it was yesterday. I won't name any names because they do follow my work, but big dude, small girl, and violent girl. And this dude was flat out abused by this tiny little nothing. And he, he was like, well, what
else
am
am I
gonna
gonna do?
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so,
No one's going to believe me.
yeah. And I mean, almost comical, the difference. But I'll tell you, the rage that was in that little one was,
Of course.
is
Yeah.
alarming.
So this is the point I was going to make here, is this concept between the child, those tender years. Oh, no, the idea that we have this, we have the best interest of the child, that concept, versus the parental rights. The idea that, okay, I'm a dad and you're a mom, I get 50%, I have 50% rights, you have 50% rights. If a judge is sitting on the bench and says, hey, I'm going to lean, I got to acknowledge that the 50-50 concept takes precedence here, that may overshadow the fact of the concept of what is the best interest of the child.
Right.
A judge, and this, I'm going to flip it because this will transition to what we're talking about, because I want to talk about that judge. How would that ruling to stand today? Could he make that ruling today and not be overturned by appeal?
I think there probably would have been an appeal in real life because again,
Based
Dave,
on what?
Dave, to your point, like this is Hollywood. This is a scene to prove a point.
And
not-
out of the
not-
90s.
And out of the 90s, yes. Keeping that in context there too. I think nowadays there 100% would be an appeal because I don't know that there was enough grounds there.
What was the basis of his ruling? Unorthodox behavior.
That's it.
You're a weird individual.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's
you're a
it.
cross-dresser.
Yeah, and so that was the only reason. And to his character's point, he's like, as far as why I did what I did, I plead insanity. That's
But it was almost as if he wasn't pleading insanity.
No,
that I didn't know
just
what I'm doing.
Like I'm doing this, and if you have to put a term on it, you could call me insane because
I'm crazy
I
for
did
my-
this for my kids.
Crazy for my kids.
Right.
And it was kind of
It was an extreme reaction.
the
Yep.
judge is supposed to be an educated person,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so here's a performer
Mm-hmm.
doing his craft to get close to his kids. It's so, I'm sorry. Not trying to
No,
Ruin it.
But that's so ridiculous that the judge is going to be like, well, you're a performer performing. You're an idiot. You can't see your kids.
You're
It's-
lying.
Yeah, it's in reality probably not going to happen. And if so, yeah, appeal wins. And that could have been the defense. I'm a performer, judge.
what do you think?
I want to see my kids.
Why wouldn't I do this?
Yes, that's this is so obvious.
I'm going to use all the skills, abilities, and talents that I have in order to realize my vision.
Exactly.
My vision is I want to be with my kids.
Yeah.
The
Why'd
fact-
you sneak into the house? I'm a ninja, Your Honor.
Yeah, it makes no sense at the end of the day because if he's gonna be a performer and use his skills, well, he didn't go rob a bank. He used it
Yeah.
to see his
I was
kids.
gonna say, what did he do
The
that
end
was
result
illegal?
was to see his kids. It makes no. Yeah, I
Right.
agree with you on that one, Dave.
So we go back to my point here is what is in the best interest of the children? Well, the best interest of the children is they had these moments. Well, like you pointed out, the kids don't get to come in and testify. So we don't see, the judge doesn't get to see the children's perspective on all of this. It was great. I didn't know it, but yeah, we didn't see that.
And that would typically happen those kids were all old
Could.
enough that they would have
Could.
been interviewed,
Well,
by a
We also
counselor
got to
or
call
something.
out David or Robin Williams' character about why are you representing yourself? Don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
2 rules. Don't ever represent yourself in court. And 2, if you didn't call, the authorities are not your friends.
Yes.
I think doesn't divorce court. I mean, especially if it's semi-amicable. Using this specific example here, you don't necessarily have to have a lawyer.
No, but in this
For that.
situation, it was nuanced enough. He did not petition to have his children. A lawyer would have said, "Hey, we want to hear from the kids. How did this? What effect did this really have on the kids? Not the judge's perception
Where
of
he's
his
too-
unorthodox behavior."
And Daniel's too emotionally compromised to think that clearly.
Right. And he's also,
Pro se typically works out best if you are somewhat versed in the law and it's a small claims thing. But this isn't small claims. This is your children and your future and your child's future and everything else, right? I mean, have some help.
yeah.
Right.
You were willing to go to these extreme measures for your kids to dress up in drag and put your face in a pie and catch your chest on fire, but you won't go so far as to hire a lawyer.
Yeah.
Okay,
Come
there's a
with some help.
there's a contradiction there.
Are we now making the claim that Robin Williams' character is again the villain in this movie?
Well, I mean, if we're prescribing right and wrong in this scenario, I think we're missing the point. And this is one of the challenges we have. Do you want to be right? Do you want to be right, or do you want to be accurate? He's not the villain. He's a
not the
person who
villain.
truly loves his kids. I think his strategy was creative, but he lost focus. He didn't.
His intent was good, but his
methods were questionable, especially when he didn't carry this through to the end. Like, oh yeah, I'll be their nanny.
Okay.
Well, what's the final outcome here?
So
that you're
I
gonna
want
get
to challenge you then, because that's a great question. So is he being measured I would specifically say, okay, so his love for his children, is it being measured by his presentation or his intent? His
Well,
presentation is Mrs. Doubtfire, the character. I did this so that way I could be
well,
a good kid. It was well intentioned, but courts don't care what your
The
intention
judgment
was.
was on his presentation.
I think
The what?
The judgment was on his presentation.
Exactly.
Well, let's. I'm going to channel Dr. David Robertson and say, shouldn't we focus on what the outcome is? You know,
So what's the outcome?
the outcome is, well, he didn't carry that through.
What was the vision?
Yeah, the vision was his short-term vision was I want to be with my kids.
Yeah.
He did not play out the long-term vision of like, well, if I go down this path and act as Mrs. Doubtfire and I'm the nanny, well, what's the final outcome here? Wow.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I never thought about
We
that.
didn't-
How,
you
how,
gotta
how
have-
does how would this play out if it
Yeah,
didn't
what's
go
the
to
end,
court?
yeah, what's the end state? What was he trying to
So the
accomplish?
movie can happen.
Yeah. You know.
Damn
so-
Hollywood.
But that's the challenge we have. And so many times when we go back to what you were talking about, Dave, in terms of like these people get so wrapped up in their emotions and they do this self-destructive and selfish behavior, sometimes narcissistic things that they, if they're truly looking at the damage they're doing to their kids, ideally they wouldn't do it, but they don't think it through that way. All they're concerned about is their own individual needs in that moment.
This movie, in a lot of ways, to me, kind of exemplifies the problem of instant gratification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How so? I haven't seen it, so how so?
Well, I mean, like the whole reason he's doing what he's doing is because he's not letting the proceedings go. You know, like to your point, you know, no attorney or whatever. It's just like I got to be with my
Okay.
kids now. You know, and so he's not building a strategy to get his kids. He's not working with his resources to strategize that outcome. All this energy that he was pouring into just being around, he could have been pouring all of that energy into orchestrating an unreal defense to ensure, you know, that he gets the custody he wants or, you know, the shared whatever. I mean, but he didn't. There was money and resources and time and all this stuff wrapped up in being in the house right now because I needed to be around my kids
Okay.
versus and at the same time potentially risking not getting them because of the shenanigans versus being able to mount the defense. You know, here I'll be there in a couple of couple of months
Yeah.
or whatever it is, and I'm going to fight with everything I am to get
I think
you.
there is something though that we've glossed over, and we are. It would be a disservice if we didn't also talk about this. That this court scene specifically is the second court hearing in this
Okay.
movie.
Oh, good point.
So there's a whole other court scene that happened, which again he's still by himself. He's still doing himself a
Right.
disservice there. But this all is encompassing a lot of factors that led to this point that we have not discussed. He lost his job. His wife kicked him out. When you're in a divorce court, I don't think you were afforded a lawyer. So you have to either pay for a lawyer or
True.
show it for yourself.
Okay.
Yep.
He didn't. I don't know his financial situation, so it's
Well,
all
he was getting
speculation
paid
there.
to be a nanny.
Yeah.
No, not in the first hearing.
Okay.
The second one,
not in the
sure.
first
Second one, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I want to. What you just said prompted something I want to. And this goes back to our list for our listeners. And within Auxesis, we've got our men's group, and several of the guys who come regularly are recently going through divorces. And so I've been coaching 3 different men through divorce. I've got some clients that I see who have been through divorce and they're dealing with that. And if there's one thing I think we need to pass along and bring to mind is when you go through a divorce, the first thing both parents should be thinking about is, what do we want the new normal to look like? That's vision focused thinking. What do we want the new normal to look like? It's not going to look like it used to be. We're not going to be living in the same,
I don't think that conversation is going to happen right away. That might be years after.
but why
it,
not?
It could happen before it starts.
Absolutely, man.
To your point, yes.
Yeah,
It
my
absolutely
former
could've.
wife and I, that's what we had. Like, what do we want? What does co-parenting look like? I don't know. Well, I think it would. Well, obviously there's going to be visitation, and obviously there's going to be child support. Well, those are the practical aspects of going through a divorce. But then there's also like, all right, we're going to co-parent. We're going to have to figure out the fact that we both want the same thing for our kids.
So you guys remember I told you that there is no difference between life and leadership. If you can do one, you can do both. Most
That was
people
you
do
that said
neither.
Yeah.
This is one of those examples, right? In a lot of ways, marriage is like high school. Or I should say divorce is
Agreed.
like
My
high
wife
school.
bullies
Divorce
me.
is like high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you got the same mentality and most people do it. Right. And so, and what I mean by that is childish, teenage
I
mentality.
just thought you meant me being bullied by my wife.
And being bullied. There you go. Being bullied
Did you
by
really
the,
fit
by
into
the
a locker?
popular girls. But most people, go through it, and it's usually childish when we do, and immature. And so that's kind of how I see that. But again, if it's one of those things where, about it going in, that the potentials and so on and so forth. I mean, you can mitigate some of this stuff long before it ever starts, right? But like most things, we're not going to regulate age on marriage and so on and so forth, but they're going to regulate the out.
Mm-hmm.
Just remember that, kids. There's very little regulation going in, but a whole bunch going out. So, yeah, of course, that's a whole
Think about this too.
slew
is-
of things to talk about.
think about this too. Is like when we say we get married early, and the good thing is people are getting married later in life, so this doesn't necessarily play into it as much. But our brain isn't fully developed until we're about 23 years old. So our executive function isn't necessarily. If you're getting married at 18, like I did, or actually 20, like I did, there was 3 years there that I was still operating with the equipment not fully engaged. Right. So many people are in that state. They don't have the intellectual and emotional intelligence, cognitive abilities to even see where they are going wrong.
Well, and that's an average too, by the way.
Yeah.
So, some earlier, but many later.
Mhm. Yeah, and then you add in the fact that what's technology and social media and societal stress doing to our cognitive development. Well, people are
Algorithmic conditioning.
people are probably that executive function is probably connecting much later in life.
I see it. I am on most forms of social media, and it is even across my algorithm that it gets thrown that there will be some video on TikTok of a woman just destroying men in general, and then there's the thousands of comments that are on there of other women that are supporting it one form or another, and it's like this blanket statement off of a singular experience.
Yep.
And I don't understand it, and because I'm a man, but we shouldn't. I don't sit there and accuse all women of being spiteful, vengeful, taking children away from fathers. So why do people who, I'll try to keep this as non-gendered as possible, why do people just immediately become I'm spiteful and I'm going to hurt you in every single way, in the most harmful way, and especially for parents like myself, we live under that threat. Why?
Something that we've said in here multiple times is the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy, because both love and hate are residing in passion. So most people's gut instinct is they think the opposite of love is that they should start hating. And so that's to quote, that's from this room. We talk about that in meetings, and I think that's what it is. They're conditioned to believe that if I don't love them anymore, I must now exist in hate. And so they lash out just to make that stance of like, hey, just to show you I don't love you anymore. Here's my attack. There's a little bit of it probably in that.
What I would add to that is when we think about a breakup like this, first of all, there's levels of uncertainty. And when we feel uncertain, we feel a loss of power. And one way we can reclaim power is by taking action. And when you're in a state of emotional distress, and when you are feeling that anger and maybe betrayal, then the way we can exercise that power is through maligning the other one, hurting them. It makes us feel more powerful. Therefore, it allows us to operate in that state of uncertainty with some sort of resolution. And it's not good. But I think that plays a factor.
There's something else too. It's an interesting nuance. It's just something to think about, right? So kind of put some perspective into this is the concept of runners and chasers. I think it's worse for for chasers than it is runners, right? So
You refer to like someone who will emotionally run away if something becomes too intense?
no, like in most relationships, you have somebody who's running and somebody who's chasing.
So like attachment theory, like anxious attachment versus avoidant.
Sort of. So it's like
Anxious attachment are people who, they need. They're the one blowing up your phone if you're not answering, right?
Yeah.
That's anxious attachment. Avoidant attachment is like, what are you doing? Back off,
yeah.
And if
So-
two people,
or
two of
hard
those
to
people,
get.
yeah, if those
Well,
two people come together, it's
So
toxic.
like sometimes in relationships, like there's the person who is pursuing the other,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at the end of the day, it's like who's pushing the rock to the penguin, and that's
What?
You don't know that?
No,
No,
pushing the rock to the penguin?
pushing
that's
the
how
rock
the
to
penguins show their eternal love.
I didn't know that was a quote.
It's a fake egg that the little penguin will carry around on their feet.
the shiny thing.
Well, it's the wedding ring.
I broke
Yeah.
momentum. Sorry, go back, Dave.
Yeah, that's all right. Well,
And, oh, by the way, is it penguin or panugan? 'Cause
it's
that-
Panugan. So, but there's a runner and a chaser, right? And there's somebody who's constantly pursuing. Sometimes it's the girl pursuing the guy, and sometimes it's the guy pursuing the girl. But the one that's doing the pursuing is the one that typically gets the bad end of the stick,
the
when
one
it
who's
comes
doing
to
the pursuing. Say that again. The one who is
the one who is pursuing the partner
Mhm.
typically gets the bad end of the stick upon divorce because they were the subservient. Well, what can I get you? What can I get you? Here's a ring. Here's a shiny thing.
Yeah.
Here's, whatever. And so
Well,
by the time it
shit.
comes to the divorce, well, you were subservient the entire time. You're just going to kind of get it anyway, where the dominant one typically gets their way anyway because that was established throughout the relationship.
Okay, I see that.
Right. So of course it's going to go to that person, that's an interesting wrinkle. I don't know if we want to go down that road, but that it is an interesting wrinkle to think of, right? There's normally a dominant personality in a relationship and just, pecking order. It happens in a lot of different ways, just like you have a dominant, like if you have multiple children, one of them's going to be more outspoken and dominant than the others. And one of them, it's just, that's how people are. And so, because normally you can't have two dominant partners.
Well, when that happens, that's when things get volatile.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times, let's look at it this way. Imagine there might be somebody who has been subservient within the relationship, but then they start coming into their own sense of identity, and we see this a lot of times. That 40, women who hit their 40s are like, I'm tired of, I need to step into who I truly am. And now we've got the divorce rates during that, with that demographic are higher. Women are like, oh no, this is who I am. And the relationship can't evolve and rebalance based on that power shift. And when that happens, a lot of those wives, when they're going through that divorce, they're like, well, I'm getting my 50. I want half, baby. And that's another reason why men don't want to get divorced. They're like,
They don't want to lose their stuff.
Yeah.
But, like in Miss Doubtfire, when you watch that, you've got a situation where, throughout really the movie, he's playing that subservient role, like, well, I just can't get my stuff together and I can't do this. But, she's portrayed as the one who's got everything together. She's the one that's making the decision. She's the one that's doing, the
She's the
grocery
stable
shopping.
one.
She's the stable one, whatever. And so in the culture within that relationship, I mean, from what we see in the story,
Sure.
But that she was the one that was dominant throughout. He was the chaser. She was the runner. So that's where that ends, and that's why that dominant scene where like, oh wait a second, my kids might need this guy who actually does care, and
It's interesting. Around the same time that this movie came out, Michael Keaton was in a movie called Mr. Mom. Do you guys remember that?
yeah,
Mr. Mom. And Terry Garr's character is the ad executive, and she's out making the money, and he's like, well, okay, I'll stay home with the kids. And he lost his job, and so it's the great fish out of water story where a dad comes back home and he's like, oh, I got to be the domestic one. And he
And it's
doesn't.
treated as a comedy.
Yeah, and it's a
'cause
comedy.
It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, but it's an interesting commentary on the social dynamics on our society, that like that was worth making a movie about, where we've got this role reversal where the mom is the breadwinner and the dad becomes the domestic caregiver, and that he was again, both. Think about this. Both of those dynamics, both these movies are rooted in. You can analyze them through who holds power, and that goes back to what you're saying in terms of the runner and the chaser. But who holds power, and then how does our society define that?
Well, in my mind, I don't know that it was power when I went through that scenario myself.
Yeah.
You talking about your ex? Let me ask you this. So
maybe it was power now that I think about it, but it's just not how I viewed it in the moment, because I'm putting myself in that moment and reliving the emotions that I was feeling. So it was definitely she had power.
Yeah.
And
Your personality
and still does to this day.
your personality is a chaser personality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which is fine. I mean, it's a good thing. I mean, that's the softer side of you. You know, so it's not a bad thing
I'm not ashamed
at
of it.
all. But it does put you into a position of perceived weakness in moments of either conflict or like decision making or whatever. Your personality type is to, don't take this as a blanket, but almost to appease. Like, well, all right, well, yeah, okay, I'll do that. We'll go along to get along, sort of a thing. Sometimes, where when it's required and like this is that moment, you'll step up and absolutely make that call. But you spend a lot of time just making sure that everybody else is okay.
I've been accused of that recently. So yes, it's very, very true. And accused is a strong word, but just was told why are you bending over backwards?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's just like, you don't understand that things are peaceful, and I don't want to rock the boat. And,
So harmonizing is a big part of families in general.
Yeah.
For me, I'll share my point of view in this, is that like my former wife was a stay-at-home mom. She wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. That was her thing, and our kids were raised with that mindset and they benefited from those dynamics. But when we hit that crossroads where we were both looking at divorce, I was the runner. She was always the chaser. And I felt an obligation, like I couldn't leave because we had agreed that she was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and therefore she had not laid the groundwork to be independent. And so because we had come to this agreement, I still felt obligated to be her caregiver. And therefore I was like, I don't want to get divorced. Even though I personally wanted to get divorced, I felt conflicted because I was like, based on the agreement that we made, I would be reneging on that. I would be putting her in a position that was just no longer tenable. Now, after that moment, we kind of had that conversation. It's like, if we ever come to this point again, I want you to know I felt that way. I need you to be, the kids are grown now. They're in school. You've got all this time during the day. I would like you to start developing a sense of independence, because what if I die, And so now fast forward, we were married for 26 years and we finally got to the point where are we going to get divorced? And she was still, she still wasn't making as much money as, it was uncomfortable for her to move out on her own, but she could do it and she knew it, and she had socked away quite a bit of money on her own as a safety net. She recognized that about her own need for independence. I have the utmost respect for my former wife. She's an amazing woman. I love her to this day. But we all grew up. It took time for us to grow into these states, into this level of awareness and personal responsibility. Right?
It's kind of funny. You guys brought up a pretty interesting memory. So I was thinking about my relationship where, I've been a fairly dominant personality.
No. Get out.
I'm a very aggressive person, right? But like even in, the way I play ball or whatever it is, like I'm very aggressive. And so my ex-wife was the first time that I was like, well, I shouldn't say maybe the first, but it was definitely a prominent time in my life where I took this weird role of being a chaser. But I was always a runner. So this one time I chased a runner, right? So we were both runners, but I chased that, and so that's where it ended up being very kind of, that's where it turned, right? Is because it was a mismatch from there. But, I have a ton of respect for her, and she was very strong, but that's where those conversations ahead of time came in handy. We had those conversations where, all right, well, what happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? And thankfully, the integrity was high enough that that kind of stuff did play out, you know. And then I eventually did get my kiddo, and you know, of course, still today, you know, got to go play dad sometimes. But it's funny, you know, to think about the relationships that we have with the whole runner chaser. But the thing happens too, with even within males.
Sure.
Right. There's this element of, if you could think about it like almost like a wolf pack, right? Wolf packs, there's different roles within the wolf pack, and they do have very specific roles. Well, we kind of do that with ourselves too, but we do this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's why even somehow, sometimes the child, like certain children, will become dominant personalities within the family. And that happens sometimes.
Because there's a role to fill, and so they
Well,
do, or they're
there's science
close
around
to it.
there's science around birth order. You know, there's the idea that, you know, the firstborn child takes on responsibility because the parent then pushes down to that first child the responsibility of co-parenting the younger siblings. The middle child is usually kind of forgotten because they are in the middle of this dynamic, and they usually are harmonizers, help people get along. The youngest child typically is spoiled. They're clowns. They usually act out. They have a strong sense of humor.
the black sheep.
You know, they can kind of be the black sheep because they get away with things. In families that have dysfunction or domestic violence or psychological violence, the firstborn will actually step in as protector, and a lot of times may take the brunt of abuse in order to protect the other children, which will then cause a deeper psychological wounds on them. So, you know, that dynamic, that power, again, it goes back to power in the family itself.
I'd love to test that theory out real quick. I know we're running short on time. I want to make sure that Aaron gets out of here in decent time, but I want to end it on a experiment with that theory there, Lance. So I'm not the oldest, but I am now the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
And
Would you catch up to your brother? I always thought I was going to
something like that.
sister.
Yeah. No, my older brother passed away
Uh-huh.
before I was born. So when I was then born, and then all my subsequent siblings came aboard, I don't think at all in any type of way I was treated to that stereotype of you're the oldest, time to take charge. And
Your parents were divorced at what age? How old were you?
I was 3.
Okay.
So my brother was 3 when he tragically passed away. My mom was pregnant with me at that time. 3 years later, they divorced, and we came out here. And she remarried, had my sister, dad remarried, and had my 3 brothers. So there was, like, I feel in my mind, like this little no man's land of.
So you're a middle child.
Am I?
Well, based on that pattern, you would most likely prescribe to the middle child dynamics because you weren't given responsibility. The
Slacker.
well, the energy and the drive around what's going on in the family, you were more because of where you are and what happened. And oh, by the way, from the ages of 0 to 1 to 3, when you got divorced, you weren't in a state to take on any responsibility. But by the time when you hit 3 and that divorce happened, your dad went off and started another family, and your sister came along. But did you take responsibility and leadership over your sister?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
And my brothers.
Okay,
Still
well,
to this
you
day.
go.
But
right,
my younger brother was raised in a household where he was undeniably the oldest in the house.
you didn't live full time with your dad.
No.
Okay, but those 3 boys lived with your dad.
Yes.
Okay, so they it's a separate ecosystem. That your dad's second family, that was a separate ecosystem. So the birth order dynamic starts unique in that. So with you and your sister, when you only have 2 siblings,
There's not really
it doesn't
a middle
play out.
child
You don't have the
scenario.
middle child dynamic there. But when you look at the whole your mom and your dad and the blended family, you're in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's how
Does
I
that
would
play out?
say, yeah, because I never really felt, I don't know how to describe it. Like, it's not negative in any type of way. It's just like I didn't feel like I had a place.
So for me, I'm the youngest of 7, but my mom remarried.
It's not negative. I just don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Well, it's like I don't know how to describe it. Like when you started talking about dynamics earlier,
Uh-huh.
I feel like I don't, my personal life just didn't subscribe to that theory. I don't feel.
Well, I mean, you stepped forward with as an older brother. So you were a firstborn. So let me tell you my story. Maybe you can see the nuance here. I'm the youngest of 7, so you would think I would be the baby, right?
Mm-hmm.
But my closest sibling is 9 years older than me, and so when I was born, they have a different dad than my mom remarried, and so my dad came along. I came along. My mom remarried, and I came along. So I actually, because my nephews and nieces were closer to my age, I actually took on a firstborn role with my nephews and nieces. So when the whole family was together, the little kids, I was the biggest of the little kids, even though I was Uncle Lance, and my closest niece was 2 years younger than me. So I grew up with they're like my little brothers and sisters. But I was the baby with my brothers and sisters. So I got spoiled. I got a car I got all sorts of things that they never benefited from because my mom could afford it. So I was treated like a baby in that dynamic, but I was the oldest child in the other dynamic. So for you were the middle child in your father's ecosystem, and you were the older child in your mom's ecosystem. And I say middle child because you were outside of the circle.
That's a fair point.
And when you were with them, they probably looked up to you and respected you as the oldest, but you didn't really, it was almost like temporary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like when you're around, we're going to respect you. But actually, when you think about the ecosystem.
We know he's going to be gone soon.
Yeah.
So
we're not.
Oh, cousin Cam came to visit
Yeah,
us,
exactly.
basically is how it felt.
Yep, you bet it.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
you're inside our circle.
Oh, thank you. I don't know how far in that circle. This is circle of trust. Yeah.
Right in the middle, man.
All right, I want to wrap up here because I know I want to make sure Aaron gets out of here at a decent time. I want to make sure you get to your kids' baseball game. So I appreciate Aaron everything that you did today to get us set up here, and thanks for everyone that tuned in. Dave, Lance, thank you all. Hey, we're live. We got some comments.
It's me, Huck. My wife was in there.
No,
Nice.
Ray actually came in.
Yeah, around the time I said that she bullies me.
Just probably watched the whole time and then was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you just wait till you get
She
home."
was like, "Hold on, my target is talking." So.
Funny thing is, that she was doing something completely different, and then it was ding.
Psychological.
Aaron's doing what?
We call that
Smell a snitch.
we call that a psychic lighthouse.
Dave, Lance, I appreciate you guys very much. Today was, I think, a great episode, and I loved hearing your guys' input on everything. And I'm excited for the next one. We're gonna turn it more positive. The next one's gonna be a little more positive themed. We're gonna talk about Iron Man and self-belief.
Oh.
Yeah, so we're gonna be a little bit more positive forward on this one, and try to wash our hands of some negative.
Well, I think we need to have the positive and the negative because, of course, the key is in the contrast.
There it is.
Oh, you got it. You got it.
All right, to everyone watching, thanks so much for tuning in. Huck, love you, man. Thanks for tuning in. And for everybody else, we'll see you next time.